Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me here. This is going to be our first lesson here on business communication. And when we talk about communication, we're talking about the transmission of information between a sender and a recipient. So in this case, I am sending information through this video and you are the recipient because you are receiving this as you watch it. Communication includes listening and our efforts to seek and understand feedback from someone who we're communicating with. Okay. When we look at barriers to communication, these are obstacles to effective communication. They can include noise. So if you're sitting here watching this video and your dog is barking in the background, that would be an example of a communication barrier. There are 6 different basic types of barriers that we're going to talk about. The first one is physical. An example of a physical barrier could be if you were sitting in class or at a conference and you were in a chair that's very uncomfortable, and all you could think about was how much that discomfort in that chair was bothering you. That would be a barrier to communication because it would be taking you away from the listening process. Language can be a barrier to communication. Sometimes we have people who have different native languages and words mean different things based upon how they've learned the language, and transmissions get kind of convoluted because of this. So that's how language can be a barrier. Then we can look at body language, and an example where body language could be a barrier to communication might be if someone was trying to talk to you but they looked very angry and upset. You might be more focused on the body language of anger that you're seeing than on the message that they're communicating, so you may actually miss some of the message that they're verbally communicating. Then we have cultural barriers to communication, which can be very similar to language barriers at times. Sometimes things have different meanings and interpretations in different cultures. When we look at nonverbal communication, this is any kind of communication that doesn't include words. So it could be gestures, posture, facial expression, many of the things that we just mentioned on the previous slide. But these can reinforce the meanings of one's message. So a lot of times as I'm sitting here and I'm going over this PowerPoint, and I can see that one of the nonverbal communications that you're missing is you're missing the way I move my hands while I talk. And I don't know why I'm moving my hands when nobody can actually see it, but I'm still doing it, and that's an example of my nonverbal communication. And then active listening are the efforts that you make to focus your attention on a speaker when you are the receiver. Okay, so tips for better listening, some do's. Use your extra mental capacity to summarize to yourself. So as I'm talking here, you can kind of re-summarize things as you're listening to make sure you're getting the key takeaways. You can take a few notes. You don't have to go crazy taking notes, but this helps you concentrate. And in a case where we're actually in the same room, it could also communicate, that you are paying attention and absorbing the information. Some don'ts. Don't glance at your emails or text messages. People know what's happening. They can tell you're disengaged. Then that's going to impact the way they deliver their message. Okay, and don't begin speaking the moment the person who's speaking stops talking. Okay, if you're in a conversation with someone, you're having a dialogue, and as soon as they stop talking, you've already got a rebuttal. What you've just demonstrated is that you spent the time that they were speaking thinking about how you were going to respond to them, not listening to what they had to say. Okay, so more do's and don'ts here. Listen with both your ears and your eyes. Notice inconsistency between words and body language, okay? So we want to make sure, if somebody's giving us an overly positive message, are they frowning? If they're giving us an overly negative message, are they smiling? And how do we interpret that inconsistency if it does exist? Use nonverbal communications, nods, smiles, leaning forward to indicate interest in the speaker. That helps let them know that you're engaged. And use verbal feedback and questions to indicate understanding. Make sure that you're confirming what you know or what you think you know. Okay, don't get overly comfortable, because if you're too relaxed, if you're sitting back in your chair and slouching, your mind may wander off a little bit. Okay, don't pick up your phone even look at your phone. Okay, when it's practical, one of the things we can do is we can turn our phones off. I'm going to show you a tool for that in just a minute. Don't interrupt or finish other people's sentences either. Sometimes they might have thoughts coming at you that you're not prepared for, and this kind of goes back to the whole not speaking as soon as they're done speaking, because if you're interrupting people and cutting them off, you're not letting them get their full message through. Now, back to the not picking up your phone component. We have a lot of technologies out there today that allow us to do this a little better than we used to be able to. Essential Calls is an example of an app that helps you with that. And what you can do with Essential Calls, you can turn this app on. You can put a few phone numbers in it that can get through to you. So for example, I would have Essential Calls set up. Maybe my wife and my daughter's phone numbers would go in there so that if they had to call me for an emergency, they could always get through to me, but anybody else who was calling my cell phone wouldn't come through, and that would keep my phone from interrupting me during a meeting or a class or someplace where I shouldn't be checking my phone. Okay, now we're going to move forward onto communication channels, and these are basically just the different ways that we can send messages. And essentially there's a lot of different channels, a lot of different vehicles that we can use to get our message across, and we want to consider who our audience is and what it is that we're trying to communicate as we choose what communication channel we want to use. Okay, so the first one we'll talk about here is texting. With texting, you want, quick, uncontroversial content that needs a quick response, simple issues, stuff you're not going to annoy people with. So, a great example of where you can use text in business is if you were meeting somebody for lunch, you could text them, I'm in the lobby right now, or I'm downstairs in your office, or things like that. But you don't want to get into anything that's too detailed with text message. Okay, then we have memos and reports. These are two different things that we'll use very similarly. We use both of them when content's not controversial, again, when a lot of people need to get the same message. So an example would be like when I put an announcement up in Blackboard and then blast it out to the entire class, that I want to let people have information. And then sometimes memos can be used for more detailed information. Emails, you generally speaking want to keep kind of short because people have very short attention spans when they're reading emails. And if you go too deep in them, you're gonna lose them. They're gonna miss key information. Okay, voicemail we use when content's uncontroversial or when both sides, don't have to have a record of the message. Telephone, need a quick response similar to text. But here, content might be a little more controversial, so we might need to be able to have a dialogue, quick 5 minutes where we can talk through some type of problem. All right, and then video conferencing. If you are 13, just kidding, a little iMessage or FaceTime joke there, right? But when you need to reach multiple people with a complex or high priority content, so we'll use tools like Zoom, Skype, WebEx. We can bring a lot of people in on them. If you need to have a dialogue and you prefer to have, the ability to have nonverbal communication in there as well, and when you're supported by technological resources, obviously, right? If you don't have the right broadband or people are going to be cutting in and cutting out, then video conferencing can be very challenging, And then we have in-person presentations. So if you need to reach a large group of people and you want immediate feedback, in-person presentations can be great. And then face-to-face meetings, for personal messages that are complex, high priority. So for example, if you had to reprimand an employee, you'd probably want to do that through a face-to-face meeting. You wouldn't want to just shoot them a text message, right? And also when you want instant feedback. So one of the things as we go through channels here that you want to think about quite a bit is if you want to be able to get somebody's feedback, email, text, things of that nature are not going to be very effective because you're going to get ghosted. Face-to-face meetings, voicemail, or excuse me, not voicemail, face-to-face meetings, telephone conversations, video conferencing. These are all places where we're going to get instant feedback from people. Okay. Now, as we're communicating, we want to make sure that we are analyzing our audience and that we understand who it is that we're speaking to. Okay, if you were delivering a message to a group of kindergartners, you would deliver that message very differently from how you would deliver it to a group of high school seniors, and that would be very different from how you deliver it to a group of professionals with 20 years of experience. We want to make sure that we're concise. If we ramble on too much, people are going to get lost. They're not really going to care about where we're going. We want to avoid slang and bias. So slang are terms that maybe everyone in our audience isn't going to understand. And, bias, we talk about there's a variety of different types of biases out there, but we want to make sure we speak to everyone the same way and don't make assumptions, because generally speaking, our biases and assumptions can be inaccurate. And if we allow them to influence the way we communicate, then we're going to be less effective than we could be if we were able to avoid these biases. Okay, and then when possible, we want to use an active voice. An example of an active voice would be the marketing plan resulted in increased sales, as compared to a passive voice, which would be like increased sales resulted from the marketing plan. The active voice tends to engage the audience a little more and tends to be a little more effective. Hope you all found this helpful. Talk to you soon.